Wyoming Territory, August 1882, the sharp sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the stillness like a whip crack. Cashin Pierce stood in the doorway of his barn, moonlight casting his tall frame in silver. The rifle was steady in his hands, aimed straight at the figure curled beneath a horse blanket in the hay. She did not flinch. Her brown eyes blinked up at him, wide but calm, framed by a tangle of dark hair. She looked about 20, maybe a little older. Dust streaked her cheeks. Her dress was torn at the hem, dried mud caking the fabric. "You planning to shoot me?" she asked, voice quiet, steady. Cashin lowered the rifle an inch, frowning. "Depends on whether you mean trouble." "I do not," she said simply, sitting up and brushing hay from her arms. "I just needed somewhere to sleep." Cashin hesitated. The wind picked up outside, rustling the cottonwoods by the creek. It had been a hard summer, dry, hot, and full of quiet tension since the railroad came through. He had not seen another soul in days. The woman sat straight now, her chin tilted with defiance he recognized. The kind of look someone wore when they had run out of places to go. He lowered the rifle all the way. "Barn's not exactly a boarding house." "I will leave in the morning," she said. Cashin stepped inside, boots crunching over hay. "You got a name?" "Adaline Grant." He nodded once. "Cashin Pierce, this is my land." "I know." "How?" She looked at him then, really looked. "Because I walked 20 miles west from Rock Springs, and everyone I passed said the same thing." "Do not go bothering Cass Pierce. He keeps to himself." Cashin exhaled slowly. "They are right." "I was not looking for company," Adaline said, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "Just a roof." He watched her another long second, then nodded toward the back of the barn. "There is a water trough behind that partition. You can wash up there. I will bring bread." She blinked. "You do not have to." "I know." He turned and walked out. The next morning, Cashin found her already outside, kneeling by the trough, sleeves rolled up. She was scrubbing her arms with cold water, her jaw tight from the chill, a fresh bandage wrapped around her right palm. "You hurt?" he asked. "Cut it on a fence post 2 days ago," she said. "It is not deep." He handed her a tin cup of coffee. She took it, fingers brushing his. Her hands were rough, calloused not from fine work, from hard living. "You from Rock Springs?" he asked. She shook her head. "Came through there. I was headed to Laramie, or that is what I told myself." "What happened?" Adaline sipped the coffee. "My father died in June. We had a dry goods store in Kansas. A neighbor took the building, said there was debt." Cashin's jaw tightened. "I left with what I could carry, hitched rides, walked, slept in barns." Her eyes met his. "This is the first place someone did not throw me out." "I almost did," he said. She smiled, small, tired, real. "But you didn't," he nodded. Over the next days, she stayed. Cashin did not ask her to leave, and Adaline did not push to go. She helped without being asked, hauling water, feeding the chickens, brushing down the horses. She never asked for anything. But every time he turned around, she was doing something useful. On the 4th evening, a storm rolled in from the west. Lightning forked through the sky as thunder rattled the windows of the small ranch house. Cashin glanced at the barn. "You do not have to sleep out there tonight." Adaline looked at him from across the table, the firelight flickering between them. "I will not bother you," she said. "You are not," he said. "There's a cot in the back room." She hesitated, then nodded. That night she lay on the cot in the room next to his. He heard her turn once, then go still. The next morning, Cashin saddled his horse before dawn. He was riding to town for supplies. Adaline stood by the fence, arms crossed. "You think it is safe?" He looked at her. "You mean for you to be here alone?" She nodded. He studied her face. "You afraid of anything?" "No," he believed her. "I will be back before dark," he said. "You need anything?" Adaline shook her head. "Just come back." He did. 2 weeks passed, then 3. One night she was standing by the barn door, brushing dust from her dress. Cashin was stacking wood nearby. "I could leave tomorrow," she said, not looking at him. He stopped. "Why?" "You have been kind. I do not want to take advantage. Do you want to leave?" She turned. "No." Cashin crossed the distance slowly, stopping a few feet from her. Then stay. Her eyes searched his. Why? He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Because you belong here, because I want you here. Adaline's breath caught. You barely know me. I know enough. Her voice dropped. I was not afraid of your rifle that night. I remember. I was tired, hungry, and alone, but I knew you were not going to hurt me. Cashin's voice was quiet. Why? Because you looked more tired than I did. He laughed, just once, deep in his chest. Then he stepped closer, gently taking her hand. I have not let anyone in this house in 5 years, he said, but you walked in like you had always lived here. She looked up at him. And you did not turn me away. No, he murmured. I did not. Cashin leaned in slow, giving her time. She met him halfway, her lips warm and certain against his. The kiss was not rushed. It was steady, like the ground under their feet. When they pulled back, she was smiling. You still want to leave? He asked. No, she whispered. Not anymore. He wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned into him like she had found the place she had been searching for all along. And maybe she had. The morning sun had barely cleared the ridge when Adaline came into the kitchen. Sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair damp from the pump out back. She carried a small bundle of wild onions and dandelion greens wrapped in her apron, the scent of dew still clinging to her skin. Cashin was by the stove, pouring water into the tin kettle, the stove already warm beneath it. You found those out past the fence, he said without turning. I did, she replied, placing them on the table. The patch near the creek's gone dry, but there's still a little green along the rise. He nodded, then poured her a cup of coffee. There's flour and lard in the bin. Thought I might try a biscuit if you felt brave enough to taste it. Adaline smiled as she folded her apron back. I'll risk it. They worked in companionable silence, the only sounds the scrape of bowls and the low hiss of the fire. Outside, the wind stirred dry leaves along the packed earth. Adaline kneaded the dough with practiced hands, her movements calm, precise. Cashin watched her from time to time, but said nothing. Later, they sat on the porch steps, eating warm biscuits with a spoon of last year's apple jam. The sky stretched wide and pale overhead, the horizon sharp and golden. You always live this far out? She asked after a while. Since I was 23, he said. Before that, cattle drives. I came north from Texas after my brother died. She looked at him, waiting. There was a girl, he added. He was meant to marry her. After the fever took him, she stayed on a while, but she didn't want the land. Said it felt like a grave. Adaline set the half-eaten biscuit in her lap. You stayed because of him. Cashin shook his head. I stayed because I couldn't think past the next day, and then the days turned into years. She didn't respond right away. Then, you don't talk like someone who's forgotten how to think past tomorrow. I hadn't, until you walked into my barn. The wind shifted. A hawk called from overhead, circling above the cottonwoods. I think I'd like to plant something, Adaline said after a moment. Something that takes time. Beans, maybe, or squash, he looked at her. Ground's hard this time of year. I'll wait. Cashin nodded slowly, then stood and held out a hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They walked to the small plot behind the house where a few faded cornstalks leaned stubbornly in the sun. I can turn it up with the plow, he said, but it'll take a few passes. I'll clear the rocks, she said, already kneeling to set aside the first one. By midday, both were streaked with sweat and dust, their hands scratched and blistered. Still, neither stopped. They worked until the light bent long across the prairie and the air cooled with evening. Inside, she dipped a cloth in the basin and wiped her arms. Cashin leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You ever think about going back? He asked quietly. She didn't pause. There's nothing to go back to, I meant, somewhere else. Adaline turned. You want me to? No, he crossed the room. But you ought to know I wouldn't stop you. Her voice was steady. You're not the kind of man who would. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing her palm. I'd rather you stayed, though. She looked up at him, her eyes unreadable for a moment. Then her shoulders softened, and she leaned into his chest, her forehead resting just below his collarbone. "I will," she said. "I want to." Cashin's arm wrapped around her, careful and sure. They stood like that a long time, listening to the wind settle and the first crickets begin to sing. Later, as dusk gathered and the sky turned violet, they sat beneath the porch eaves, his arm draped behind her, her head against his shoulder. The quiet wrapped around them like an old quilt, familiar, worn, and full of history. No words passed between them, but none were needed. The land around them was still, but something inside had shifted. Not sudden, not loud, just enough to feel it was real. A slow September came, dry as cotton and quiet enough that the smallest things began to matter. A cracked boot heel Cashin repaired by hand. The soft creak of the porch rail when Adaline leaned on it in the evenings. A single yellow bloom pushing up through the garden earth she'd turned with her own hands. The days had begun to fold into each other, not out of sameness, but a rhythm neither of them needed to name. Mornings found her in the garden and him in the lean-to, sharpening tools or oiling harness leather. They ate together, worked apart, and found each other again in the hush of twilight. One afternoon, Cashin came in from mending a gate, his shirt stuck to him with sweat. Adaline was at the table, bent over a piece of muslin, threading a needle with steady fingers. She didn't look up. "That for anything in particular?" he asked. She tied a knot and snipped it. "Curtains, for the back room." Her voice was even, but there was thought in it. He filled the basin and washed his hands, glancing over. "Didn't figure you for sewing." "I didn't used to, but I've had to learn things I never thought I would." She pulled the fabric taut. "It's not the stitching that's hard, it's deciding it's worth the time." Cashin dried his hands on a rag. "And is it?" She met his eyes. "It is now." They didn't say more. He stepped past her and poured water into a pot, set it on the stove without needing to ask if she was hungry. They moved like they'd done this 100 times, though they hadn't, not even close. That night, when the air cooled enough to light the stove, Adaline stood near the door, holding a small paper-wrapped parcel. "I want to show you something," she said. Cashin wiped his hands and followed her outside. She led him past the corral, through the short grass that covered the bluff above the creek. The moon was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows behind them. She knelt down and unwrapped the paper. Inside were a handful of dried petals, tiny glass beads, and a square of folded blue cloth. She laid them out on the grass. "My mother made this when she was a girl. She gave it to me when I turned 16, said it was for luck." She ran a finger over the cloth, careful. "I kept it through Kansas, through the border towns. I almost lost it twice." Cashin crouched beside her, quiet. "I thought about burying it when I got here," she said. "Didn't want to hold on to something just because it came before. But you didn't." "No, I wanted to see how it looked in the moonlight first." He glanced at her. "And," she tilted her head. "Still worth keeping." She folded the cloth again, slower this time, and tucked it back into the paper. "Why'd you bring me?" he asked. She stood. "Because you're the only person I've shown it to." He rose with her, brushing off his hands. "You didn't have to." "I know." They walked back without hurrying, the ground dry beneath their boots. He didn't reach for her hand, but she brushed against his side, and that was enough. The next morning, a rider came up from the south trail, dusty, lean, with a telegram in his saddlebag. Cashin stepped down from the porch to meet him. The message was addressed to Adaline. She read it on the porch rail, her expression unreadable. "Bad?" Cashin asked, shielding his eyes from the sun. "No," she said. "An old friend from Junction City. She found out where I was." She folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. "She's getting married." He waited. She thought I might want to come back for it. He didn't speak. Adaline looked out across the pasture. "I think if she'd written sooner, I might have gone." She turned to him. "But I don't want to now. I don't belong there anymore." Cashin nodded once. She stepped down from the porch, the breeze tugging at a loose curl near her temple. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you hadn't stayed?" He looked toward the barn. Sometimes. But I don't think I'd like the answer. She moved a little closer, her voice lower. You ever think about what you want now? He looked at her then, really looked. I do. And I want a house that's not half empty. I want the garden you planted to grow. I want someone to sit across from at the table who doesn't leave when the weather turns. Her eyes didn't waver. And if it turns hard, then we hold steady. She reached for his hand. Then let's begin. By late September, the frost came early, thin and sharp across the windowsills by dawn. The garden gave its last, and Adaline pulled what she could small squash, a handful of beans, the last of the onions. She laid them out on the kitchen table, dirt still clinging to their roots, then sat a while with her hands folded, listening to the quiet hum of the stove. Cashin was building a new chicken coop behind the shed, the old one too warped to last another winter. She found him there late in the afternoon, sleeves rolled, sawdust clinging to his forearms. He didn't look up as she approached, just kept working the plane across the edge of a cedar board. You ever think of hiring someone on? She asked. He straightened, wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. I thought about it, but there's not many who'd stay this far from the tracks. You ever want to leave it behind? The land, the quiet, all of it. He set the plane down, looked at her. I used to think that was the only way to get free of it. Now I don't know. She stepped closer. I've been thinking about teaching again. Cashin's eyes narrowed with interest. You taught before, back home, before my father's shop took up all our time. Just a few children, one room above the mill. I wasn't much older than they were. He nodded. There's a schoolhouse in Medicine Bow, empty since spring. I heard, she said. I thought maybe I'd ask the pastor if there's still a board. Cashin leaned his hip against the frame. You don't need my say-so. I know, she said, but I'd like to know you'd be glad if I did. His answer was simple. I'd be proud. The next day, she rode into town alone, wearing her best dress, the one she hadn't touched since Kansas. It was faded at the seams, but it fit well enough. She set her shoulders straight when she walked through the chapel doors and asked to speak to the board. When she returned, dust clinging to her hem, Cashin met her by the fence. How'd it go? She handed him a folded letter. He read it, then looked at her sideways. They want you to start next month. They do, she said. I'll take the wagon 2 days a week. I can be back before dark. He nodded. We'll make it work. That evening, he brought down a box from the attic one she hadn't seen before and set it on the table. Inside were books, worn and weathered, arithmetic primers, readers, a few bound copies of essays. These were my brothers, he said. He meant to teach too before he got pulled into cattle work. Adaline ran her fingers over the covers, careful. You kept them all this time. I didn't know what I was holding on to, he said. Now I do. She looked up at him, and something passed between them, quiet and certain. That night they lay side by side, the lantern turned low. The wind had picked up, brushing the shutters with dry fingers. Adaline shifted beneath the quilt, voice soft. I used to dream of what life would be. It was always somewhere else, someplace I hadn't reached yet. Cashin's voice was steady. And now it's right here, she said. And it doesn't need to be louder than this. He reached for her hand beneath the covers, and she clasped his, fingers twining. They lay like that, the silence between them full of warmth. In the morning, frost traced the garden fence, and the first geese passed overhead, their calls echoing against the hills. Cashin saddled the wagon while she packed a basket with bread and apples. As she climbed up beside him, he handed her a folded scarf. This belonged to my mother, he said. She wore it come winter. Adaline wrapped it around her shoulders. It's warm. So are you. They rode out together, the sun rising at their backs, the road opening ahead with the quiet promise of all that still waited. The first snow came early, a soft hush drifting over the prairie and laying down a clean page over the worn paths between the barn, the garden plot, and the well. Adaline stood at the kitchen window that morning, arms folded beneath her shawl, watching the flakes swirl over the corral. Cashin was out early, tying extra canvas over the haystack, his hat already dusted white. When he stepped through the door, boots heavy with snow, he set his gloves on the stove edge and leaned down to unlace them. "Fence lines holding," he said, "but the north post near the bluff's leaning. Might not see spring on its own. I'll walk out with you tomorrow," Adaline said, pulling the kettle off the hook, "if the wind settles." He sat at the table, his shoulders stiff from the cold. "You'll need better boots for that." "I saw a cobbler's shop in town," she said. "I'll stop next week after lessons." Cashin glanced at her hands as she poured the water, noting the ink on her thumb, the faint tear at her sleeve. "You've been working longer hours." "There's more children now," she replied. "2 new families came from Illinois. They brought books too." "Better ones than what I had." He nodded, then paused. "You still want to keep it at come spring?" She turned, cup in hand. "I didn't start it just to stop when it got hard." He accepted the tin mug, fingers brushing hers. "Didn't think you did." Later that day, they moved the last of the root cellar jars from the shed to the kitchen shelves. Adaline labeled each with her neat, deliberate hand. Cashin worked beside her, wrapping each crock in burlap before setting it down. He reached for one, then paused. "You ever think about having someone else here, a hand maybe, or someone to help when you're in town?" Adaline met his eyes. "You worried I'll stretch too thin?" "I'm thinking of the winter after next, not just the one ahead." She set the chalk aside. "I don't want to hire anyone who doesn't understand quiet or the work." "You wouldn't have to," he said. "I know a man, Orrin Tawley. He's got a daughter near your age. They lost their place west of Rawlins. He's not young, but he's honest." Adaline nodded slowly, considering. "If they come, they'll need a roof." "I'll fix the loft in the barn," Cashin said. "It's warm enough with the stove lit." She reached for his sleeve, stopping him gently. "Ask them." He met her gaze. "You sure? I want this place to grow. I want it to be more than just ours." That night, as snow thickened over the roof, they sat near the fire. Cashin carved a new handle for the kettle lid, knife moving slow and sure. Adaline hemmed a new curtain, her stitches small and even. He spoke without looking up. "When you came here, I didn't believe a thing could shift me anymore." "I didn't come to shift you," she said, "but you did." She set the cloth aside. "I was looking for ground I could stand on, that's all." He looked over at her, expression quiet. "You think you found it?" "Yes," she said. "And more." He set the carving down. "Come spring, I want to build onto the house." She blinked. "Why?" "Because we'll need the room." Her brow lifted slightly. "Are you planning something I don't know yet?" He smiled faintly, not wide, just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. "I'm planning on you staying. I'm planning on us." She rose, crossed to sit beside him. "Then say it." He turned toward her, the lamplight soft against his jaw. "Marry me, Adaline." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." They didn't kiss right away. They just sat there, eyes locked, hands joined, like the whole room had shifted to hold the shape of what they'd just done. Then she leaned in, and he met her halfway, slow and certain. The snow kept falling, and the fire burned low, and the house no longer felt like something left behind, but something begun. The Tawley family arrived in early March. Orrin brought a tired mule and a cart patched with 3 kinds of wood. His daughter, Ruth, was quiet but capable, and she took to the chickens without complaint. By April, the fence post near the bluff stood straight again, and fresh rows of beans pushed up through the soil Adaline had turned with care. Cashin added a new room to the house, a lean-to built with pine hauled down from the ridge. It smelled sharp and clean, and Adaline filled it with shelves for books, lesson slates, and scraps of muslin she no longer had to fold away when guests came. They married by the creek, under the first green buds of cottonwood. The pastor came from Medicine Bow, and Ruth made lavender water to scent Adaline's dress. Cashin wore a clean shirt and his father's watch. They said their vows with hands clasped and eyes steady. No guests beyond the Tawleys, no music, no grand words. Just the wind in the trees and the steady sound of water moving over stone. That night, they sat on the porch again, as they had that first evening, Boots resting on the step, her head tucked under his arm. The stars were clear, the air just warm enough to hold. "You still think about all the places you could have gone?" Cashin asked. "No," she said. "I think about here, I think about tomorrow, and I think about you." He rested his chin against her hair. "I'll take that." In the years that followed, the house weathered storms and summers, laughter and quiet. Adaline taught until her hair turned silver, and Cashin never left the land. They planted apple trees. They built a second coop. They read by lantern light through long winters and watched the stars wheel overhead through the open windows of July. They never spoke much of the years before they met, not because they forgot them, but because they'd outgrown them. All that mattered was the life they built, hand over hand, side by side, and they stayed, together, always.